Thanks for listening to the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, here to help educate, motivate, and put you on the right path to take control of your health through weekly discussions on topics in the medical field, public health arena, and in your community. And now your host, Dr. Barry.
Hey, welcome everybody. Dr. Barry here, your host of the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. This is episode 41. So if you want my show notes, please head over to drpierresblog.com/LLP041. Again, if you want my show notes, head over to drpierresblog.com/LLP041. It has been greatly appreciated. You know, we're 41 episodes in, and you guys' support has been absolutely amazing. You know, every month we have, since we started, which you started like in July, every month since we started, the downloads have just continued to increase. So continue, supporting, continue telling a friend to support, because the love is much appreciated here on this end, right? And I appreciate the reviews on Apple Podcasts. So go ahead, if you have Apple Podcasts, you listen to this on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to leave me a 5-star review saying how much you love the episode. And if you have some episode ideas you want to hear, leave it in the comments as well, and I will definitely make sure we get to them. On today's episode, you're going to be hearing, a recap of my recent trip to D.C. I actually went for the American College of Internists Conference, and it was absolutely amazing. I got to meet ZdoggMD, who is phenomenal and a very big motivating factor in everything I do in regards to writing blogs, doing videos, doing podcasts. Like, he's just absolutely amazing. I got to meet him, got to talk to him, even got a picture with him as well. So definitely you're going to hear another amazing episode, and we're going to be talking about things like what I learned in terms of how to become a better program director, in terms of what to do in cases of domestic violence, in cases of, this opioid epidemic, and most importantly, in cases of, HIV, right, which is huge in, medicine right now, right? All three of those, different topics, right? So get ready for an amazing episode. Here again, episode 41. The link, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, iHeartRadio. I'm on all of those outlets that you want to hear this episode on, that you're probably listening to this episode on now. Again, the love and support is extremely appreciated here on this end. So get ready for another great episode, and I appreciate all that you guys do that keeps pushing me to make these great episodes for you. Hey guys, Dr. Barry here, and I'm reporting from DC. I'm at the ACOI Conference, and I just wanted to kind of give a wrap-up update. I'm actually going to be headed back home tomorrow, and I wanted to kind of give an update on what I learned during this conference, why I went to the conference, and why I keep going to these types of conferences. First and foremost, as a program director, the ACOI, which is the American College of Internists, has a program director / director of medical education section where they go through different topics, including like how to coach, how to mentor your residents, ways to help your residents succeed, especially your interns. And for those who may not be familiar, interns are your first year residents, and those are the ones who, just finished medical school and get out and, get on the ball, and you kind of have to mold them from the beginning. And it's very important, especially in the beginning, right? And I remember when I was an intern in my internal medicine residency, and understanding that I knew next to nothing, but my residents and my attendings were so influential in helping molding me into what I am like today. Like, literally, because I finished residency in 2014. So, 3 years later, so pretty much if you think about it, like 6 years since I started residency, my residents and my attendings were so influential, and that's why it was so important. So a lot of the focus and the teaching during that section was really on how to build successful interns and successful residents, and also how to build a successful program, right? So that was like one of the main reasons why I went there. Also, side note, the job was paying for me to go, right? Because, hey, you know what? Their program director, needs to be enriched with some knowledge, so they were willing to pay for it. So I was able to kill a couple birds with one stone. It's a funny story, I hadn't been in D.C. for like, oh wow, now I think about it, about 7 years, about 7, 8 years, because the last time I had been to DC, I was applying for medical school, right? I was actually applying to get into Howard University, and I got waitlisted, during my interview season, and I ended up not coming because I wanted to stay in Florida, and I ended up going to Nova Southeastern University. It was about 7 years. Wow, time is... No, take it back. It's about 10 years. Yeah, because I'm trying to remember. I started medical school in 2007, and yeah, so it's been about 10 years, since I've been in D.C., right? And love the city. I got plenty of friends in the city, so I've had plenty of reasons to go back to D.C., but I just never did, right? Again, I was able to, see the sights, see some friends, and then also learn, right? And so I want to kind of like go through, the conference in these past couple of days, what I've learned, and why I keep coming to it and what's so important about it. The last time I've been to this ACOI conference, I actually became a fellow, right? I became a fellow of the American College of Internists, which is bestowed upon members of the American College of Internists who show some exemplary efforts outside of medicine, but fulfilling the motto of trying to be the consummate profession and consummate internist. So I was a fellow. So the last time I was here, was at the conference. The last conference last year was in California, which coincidentally was the first time I went to California. And I'll just hit a quick side note. For me, when it comes to traveling, I'm from South Florida. So when it comes to traveling out of Florida, it takes a lot, right? And I can tell you, on one hand, the amount of times I've actually left the state of Florida that didn't actually include like a medical conference, right? Like that's how bad I am, right? I'm not a big traveler, don't really like traveling, don't really care to travel. So, and I'm in South Florida, right? So why would I want to leave South Florida when everything is here in South Florida? So I can literally count on one hand, I'm 34 years old, I can count on one hand the amount of times I've actually left the state of Florida that did not include, a medical conference, right? So I was at California last year for ACOI. This year I was in DC. And starting out was, like the pits, I'll say that. Because my kids actually gave me their illness. Like my kids were sick right before I left, and I got sick. So the first day I wasn't even able to really attend any of the sessions. But for anyone who goes to these conferences, the first day you don't really go through very much, right? There's a little bit of education, but not as much as expected. But the second day, right? The second day was a highlight, right? And if you follow me on Instagram, Instagram.com/Dr. Barry Pierre, I actually got to, hear Dr. ZDogg, right? ZdoggMD, right? I got to hear him speak. And his talk was absolutely amazing, right? He incorporated a lot of video and a lot of emotion in his talk and trying to get physicians, all in one accord, right? And he really stressed, the ability as physicians to, reach out and touch their patients and educate their patients in so many different ways, right? And if you're not familiar with ZDogg, I will put a link to some of his video. I'll put a link to his Facebook and everything in the show notes for him, right? So he was, absolutely amazing. And then afterwards, right, like you should have seen the line that was waiting for him just to talk to him, right? And I definitely took a picture of the line because I was like, wow, most of the time, especially in these medical conferences, the keynote speakers are, they're okay, right? But they're kind of boring, right? Nothing that you really kind of, touch your head for, right? But like ZDogg had a line absolutely waiting for him, right? And, I have no pride in my, no shame in myself, right? So I went to go meet him as well, stand in line. And what I think was important, right? And it was absolutely amazing. First, I got my picture, right? Because I had to get my picture. But second of all, like speaking to him and kind of letting him know, like, hey, he's been how much of a motivator he's been for me, because he actually has, as a person who does blogging and podcasting, obviously, and the videos. He's definitely been someone that I've looked up to and tried to emulate in that regards, right? As far as like, how can I talk to my patient, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we do here, right? We try to find different ways to help educate our patients and make them care about their health just as much as we care about their health, right? And that's kind of started it all, right? And he's been one of the pioneers, in medicine, and as a physician, right, who kind of said, like, hey, this is a way you can do what you need to do, right, without that hassle, right? So I was ecstatic to be able to meet him, talk to him, and even the highlight of my trip, right, was talking to him and him saying, like, I can tell, Dr. Barry, I could tell, like, you have that it factor, right? It's like, I could just tell it was very infectious. And of course, I'm hyped, right? Because I'm like, oh my God, ZDogg said I had the it factor, right? And he just told me keep on working. So, that's what we're going to do, right? We're going to keep on working and continue to do what we do here, right? So I definitely had to go down and say, oh, I'm definitely going to record before I leave this place here, right? Because it's absolutely amazing, right? ZDogg. With the shout out, right? And again, check out my Instagram. You'll see my picture with ZDogg. You'll see that the line kind of waiting for him because, it was absolutely amazing, right? And just kind of going through the the conference and kind of, learning and updating myself on different techniques, whether it be like how to treat, reflux disease, how to treat diabetes, how to deal with, post-operative and pre-operative management. Because it was nice because we actually had like a joint conference with the American College of Osteopathic Surgeons. So it was nice to kind of get that, entailed as well, to kind of see both of those aspects of medicine in that regards. So definitely was happy to see, to be able to kind of get my learn on, because I always do, right? Like, obviously, when you see me, usually I'm doing the teaching. But a lot of times, I can't do the teaching if I'm not learning myself, right? So a lot of times when I'm giving these talks on, these various subjects that I may not be the subspecialist in, and I always stress that to my patients that, as an internist, right, we're very aware of a lot of disorders, right? We just are, right? Like, that's just something that we've been forced to be, right? We're very aware of a lot of disorders. We may not be the end all be all expert, but we know enough to know when we got to send you to those experts, right? And that's why I've been able to touch on so many variety of topics, right? Because again, I may not be a rheumatologist, but I know enough about lupus and rheumatoid arthritis to talk about it. I may not be, a gynecologist, but I know what happens when patients are having issues with, menstrual cycles, right? Like, it's just something that, as an internist, and it was one of the reasons why I became an internist, because all of those topics I'm able to touch on, and all of those topics I actually enjoy touching, right? Like, I actually enjoyed having to learn about, kidney related issues and GI related issues and endocrine related issues, right? It's just something about reading and learning that's always been very fascinating to me, right? So that's where when I go to these conferences, especially ACOI, we kind of learn about a lot of different topics, right? Like, it's not just one fixated on the other, right? It almost goes in different sections, right, where we'll learn about a lot of GI related issues. I talked about, like, the reflux disease and GERD, and then we kind of moved on to like lung issues and heart issues, all of those things kind of under the sun, getting us to try to focus on, that type of medicine, right? And like almost like a refresher course, right? Because again, I may not have the time to, sit in a classroom no more, but when I go to these conferences, I do make an effort to try to learn. And I think that's the most important, right? As your physician and as any physician, regardless of what field you're in, right? Like if you get to the point where you don't think you have to like continue learning, like you got to get out, like get out the profession like ASAP, right? Because that's, not going to fly here. Especially in medicine, especially where technology is moving and shaking at lightning speeds, right? And so if you're not ready to adjust with it and learn with it, like you'll be left in the dust, right? And that's why I love, ZdoggMD and doctors like him, because he's fully aware, right? And me and him, we're kind of fully aware that in this day and age, right, if you have a physician who's, pretty much refusing, right? Like, and that's what you almost, at this day and age, you almost have to be doing it, right? You almost have to be refusing to engage in social media, right? You have to be refusing to engage in like video media or audio media because your patients, especially again, patients are already saying that you're not spending time with them, right? They're already saying that after 10 minutes, you're already looking at your watch, you're trying to get out the room, right? You're already not spending your time with your patients, right? So if you're not giving your patients supplemental ways to learn and feed off of you, right? Like you're going to be left in the dust, right? And when I was doing outpatient medicine, right, that was one of the things my patients absolutely loved about me. I had a lot of patients before they would even come to see me in the office. They had already been on my website. They had already checked out the blog. They had already checked out maybe a podcast or so. Well, probably not a podcast. I didn't start podcasts until I got inpatient, but they've already checked out like my videos, right? They had already checked out information about me, which helped establish my credibility even before I said one word directly to them. And in this day and age, if you have a physician that's still refusing to do that, you got to really question, the ability of a physician. And I got to just be honest, that's just the truth, especially in this day and age, right, where there's a physician, almost everywhere you turn, depending on where you stay at, and your physician has to, catch up with the times, right? So that's why, following a person like ZdoggMD and, others like him and is so important because again they're embracing it, right? Like in ZdoggMD, he does it in a very comedic way, but for those, especially us in the medical field, we know that he's being as serious as possible. But that comedic way is how he's able to tap in and talk to his patients and his patient circle. So that's what I loved about that, right? So, now, moving on. So, we're learning about all of these different, getting refreshers and all of these different health systems, right? So then on the Saturday, right? So Saturday, I am, doing some courses on that's required for my license, right? Because I got to do that like every 2 years or so, right? So I'm doing some courses that are required on my license, right? One in particular, and this is a very popular topic, and I'll probably have to do a whole podcast episode on it, is the opioid epidemic, right? Like, and as a physician in Florida, it is something that we run into a lot, and it is something that we have to deal with quite often, like all the time, in regards to either patients being on medications and not getting enough of it, patients being on medications and, withdrawing from it, overdosing from it. It just, one way, shape, or form, we have to deal with it, right? And in Florida, especially, I'm in South Florida, right, where a lot of your physicians have gotten to the point where they're pretty much afraid to prescribe these medications just because of all of the problems that has arisen from it. You have these patients who, may need that medication. Well, most likely they do because they've been on it for so long, but they can't even get someone to prescribe it for them, right? And this course, right, and it was like our course, right, just talked about opioid practices and, how, they do it in different parts of the state in terms of regulation, in terms of, drug testing, in terms of like contracts and all of these things under the sun to kind of say, hey, this is how we do to try to help combat, the opioid problem, that is here, in the United States in general, right? But I can tell you Florida's a big one. Florida's a big player when it comes to the opioid abuse in that regards. And it's crazy. I can tell you, I'll just tell you a little caveat. And like I said, we'll probably have a podcast episode on itself. I remember being a resident, which is 2011, 2012, when the law like really came down on, what we would describe as pill mills, right? And a pill mill, if you had to think about it, was a doctor's office, right? Who you would go to see the doctor. You'd probably have to pay cash to see the doctor, most likely. So you'd pay cash, you see this doctor, and he said, yeah, you got back pain. Yeah, you got chronic this, you got chronic that. Whatever, whatever the issue is, right? He diagnosed it. And then he said, okay, go ahead and pick up, 60 pills of oxycodone or 60 pills of Percocet, 60 pills of whatever, right? Whatever the number is, you had to pick up a certain number of pills in the pharmacy, right? And then he would say, say the quote unquote, and I say pharmacy in quotes, because what would happen is that he would send you to maybe the next building or maybe, 2 rooms down the hall in a pharmacy that he or she owned, right? So think about it, right? So you've already had to pay 60 or 160 usually. So it was a good amount. You usually had to pay like $160, right? Just to go see, the doctor, just to have the doctor talk to you, say, hey, yeah, you do have this pain. Let me write you this prescription. And then you would go to his pharmacy, his or her pharmacy, and fill the prescription out, right? And so you had to pay, you were almost paying double, right? And you were paying in cash for the pain medication, and you were paying in cash to see the doctor. And then you had to come back, in a month, right? Because, I have to see you every month, right? I have to get this money every month. And so you had a lot of patients who were stuck in that cycle where they were getting these, pain medications from the same doctors who were prescribing the pain medications. So once, the law changed and didn't allow that, you had a lot of these, buildings kind of closing down overnight, right? A lot of these pill mills closed down overnight. And we saw like a rush of patients who were withdrawing from opioids, like almost immediately in a hospital. Admissions for opioid withdrawal, opioid overdose, like shot up, right? So, when I fast forward today and I see all of this quote unquote opioid epidemic, affecting, a certain population, it's not a shocker to me, right? Like this writing was on the wall at least 5 years ago, right? So at least 5 years ago, we saw that this was happening, right? Of course, now it's starting to affect a population, that tends to get a lot of notoriety when things happen to it. And, that's kind of where we're here now, right? So that, the topic that we talked about during ACOI regarding opioid, use, opioid prescriptions, contracts, and all these things was very informative, right? And it's definitely something that when I go back to do outpatient medicine, I definitely plan on, installing to get to that, to make sure I'm quote unquote compliant with Florida law, right? Because I don't want to be, against the law. You got now, especially when I was doing outpatient medicine, you used to have the pharmacy. The pharmacy would call me and be like, hey, Dr. Pierre, looks like you're prescribing, whatever medication for so and so. We just want to let you know that this patient has gotten a prescription already, or the pharmacies were very hip, right, to the doctors, right? So it's not something that you could get away with anymore, right? And they're trying to put more onus on the physicians, to kind of get their act together. So that was definitely a good class to be in, right? I think then the second one, I had an important one, right, was my domestic violence course, right? So this is another course that actually we're required to do every 2 years, I think. Every 2 years, right before I have to get my license renewed, we have to do this, right? And what was very interesting in telling about this course, right? I'm always interested, and just to kind of hear the scenarios of like how to deal with patients, who may be suffering from domestic violence, like in your office, right? Because as the primary care physician, right, and I've actually did, a lunch and learn. I think I did a podcast on it as well. I'll have to put it in the show notes if I did. What I think is important, right, with, the domestic violence issue, right, is as a physician, there's certain, laws that I even have to abide by, when it comes to, reporting domestic violence and acting on it. And in particular, and this is in Florida, again, this is not, span to other states. I know I have people, across the country who listen to my podcast, but in Florida, legally, I'm not even allowed to call the police, right, unless my patient gives me permission, right? Unless my patient gives me explicit permission to call the police, I'm not allowed to call them. Because what was shown that, for, patients whose husband most usually was husband. We'll say wife to be, non-biased, right? But let's just say husband, right? Whose husband, right, was that the police was informed and got in contact with and had issues with. The likelihood that that patient was in danger and would suffer physical harm was so great that if you did not have an escape plan, exit plan, people to contact, if you didn't have all of those things ready to hand to the patient, you couldn't do it. Like, you literally could not do it because you were literally putting your patient in danger by informing the police. And there was actually someone who was, under investigation, not under investigation, actually under a lawsuit, a physician under a lawsuit, as we spoke during the conference, because they called the police. They called the police on, the abusive husband. The abusive husband went to jail for about 3 days. But what happened when they got out of jail, they went and they actually, unfortunately, murdered the wife, right? And the family members of, the slain victim sued the doctor because the doctor did not give the patient, an exit plan to say, hey, once I call the police, we need to do this, and that, right? So the doctor only did part of the job. So it was very telling. Like I said, it was such an interesting conversation with domestic violence. And what was so crazy is that even the presenter, the person who was actually giving the talk on domestic violence, she was actually thrown in jail because she defended herself against her abusive husband or ex-husband, right? She was thrown in jail, right? So that's how crazy when you think about domestic violence and when you think about, why, people don't, come forward when they need to come forward, right? Like, those are things that as a physician, I got to be aware of, right? I got to be wary of, before I just say, oh, let's just go call the police. Let's just get the authorities in there, right? Like, as a physician, like, it's my obligation that if I go that step, and again, and I'll tell you, the only caveat, which was so crazy, this, again, Florida law, because Florida law is Florida law, the only caveat where I don't need the patient's permission, right, and even if I see a physical injury, the only caveat that I don't need the patient's permission to call the police is if there's a gunshot wound. Yes, a gunshot wound. Like, yes, I said it. Like, and I made sure I paused on purpose, right? The only way I can call the police on a patient is if there's a gunshot wound that I can see that's visible, and that's the only way I can call, right? So again, Florida law is Florida law, and that's the craziness that you have to deal with, right? Anything else, physical bruising, anything, you cannot call the authorities, right? Unless the patient, gives you permission. So definitely an extremely important topic, especially when you're again, if you're, unless you're like, refusing or like listen to media at this time, right? You see all the stuff that's going down with that. I think Harvey Weinstein, right? Like, you see all this stuff, the sexual assault and all of the the claims that are coming forward now, right? That's it, right? Like, it's that power struggle that happens, within, a relationship, right? And that occurs with the domestic violence aspect of it, right? And it takes so much strength, inner strength, and then outwardly strength, just with support, to be able to step forward and say, yes, this is happening, right? So again, especially with all of the stuff you're seeing going on in Hollywood right now, right? You can understand why, when someone's in a position of power, why no one ever just kind of speaks up and tells on them, for that part, right? So again, that was very, very key and very, important, lesson that we learned there. And then the last one I'll talk about, before I get out of here, is this HIV, right? HIV is huge everywhere, right? It's just huge. And there was so much new information coming out during the conference that, I was like, oh, wow, that's very interesting, right? For example, right, HIV, the life expectancy, right? When we talked about HIV, 10, 20 years ago, right? The life expectancy of a patient with HIV, right? It was almost like 10, to 15 years, younger than a person without HIV. It has now gotten to the point, especially with medication, that the life expectancy of a person with HIV is only about 2 years, shorter than the life expectancy of someone without HIV, right? So think about that, right? Like before it cut off 10 to 15 years of your life. Now it only cuts off about 2 on average, right? So, we're doing an amazing job, treating HIV. Now the caveat. The caveat is we still have way too many people that are walking around with AIDS, with HIV, undiagnosed, right? Way too many people walking around undiagnosed, right? And this is where it hit home for me, right? The infectious disease doctor, he was actually from Louisiana, he talked about how even in his practice, he even tests nuns, right? So even he tests nuns every year for HIV, right? He says if you're in his practice, you're being tested for HIV. I think what happens in the primary care setting is that we kind of have this belief that we don't, this person doesn't quote unquote look like they have HIV, so I'm not going to test them. Or this person's not asking for the test of HIV, so I'm not going to test them, right? And his strong words for us was like, get out of that mode, right? As a primary care physician, as a physician in general, regardless, and he even pointed, he said, and I don't want you to put it all on the primary care docs, right? Like, if you're having a patient, if you're a cardiologist, a gastroenterologist, a surgeon, if you have a patient in your practice who likes to come see you, make sure they're being tested for HIV. Because he said that's where a lot of the new HIV cases are coming out of, because patients who are undiagnosed, who don't know, they don't go see the doctor, or even if they go see a doctor, they never get the HIV test, right? They walk around and giving it to people unexpectedly. So that's where he said where we need to focus on in this the process of in the path of HIV and improving the odds of HIV is really focusing on that population, and it's a huge one. I think he was saying like 20%, right? 20-25%. A huge population of patients with HIV don't know it. And it's because the doctors aren't even asking for it, right? They're not even asking to do the test, right? So again, he hit home that big time, right? So I took that for heart, because I'm like, okay, I gotta make sure, and I'm in a hospital setting, right? So in a hospital setting, we tend not to order those certain types of tests. Why? Because we want to make sure patients have good follow-up. But I'm definitely much more diligent on patients who may have risk factors to make sure we get that test done, right? So that was definitely something I took home, from that lecture. Also, with the advent of medical technology and medications, making sure that we're starting our patients early to start HIV treatment was very key, because he said when he contrasted the past where yes, you can be diagnosed with HIV today, but it may take we may do some excess blood work, which may take a couple weeks before we actually start trying to treat him. And their new philosophy is like, no, if a person gets diagnosed today, they leave with a prescription in hand and start taking today. So that was another thing that he kind of talked about and wanted to stress on us, like, hey, make sure you are getting your folks checked, right? And that was a big thing, right? December 1st, I believe, yeah. December 1st is coming up. World's AIDS Day is coming up. But you don't have to, and he was like, you don't have to wait till World's AIDS Day to get your status, right? You can get your status tomorrow, next week. Like he said, just get it done. And so that was, the big, out of the big three, especially on Saturday, that I took from, I said, wow, like he's not lying. And I'm definitely going to make sure, I'm on my P's and Q's, right? And again, that's why, to kind of wrap up, that's why I love these conferences, right? Because even though I'm in my, my shell where, I'm learning about like different topics every single day, whether I have to teach it or whether I'm just learning it just to learn it, to go to that conference, see a lot of like-minded individuals, and we're all learning together like we're back in school, which is always amazing, right? Plus I got to see friends, plus I got to see old classmates, Plus a friend of mine, Dr. Angelina Ravelli, she became a fellow of the American College Internists as well, right? So all great things happen, during that week of conference. And plus I got to get away, right? I got to get away for quote unquote vacation time, right? And I can tell you as, an entrepreneur, as a physician, right? Vacations aren't something that we tend to enjoy because we like just taking care of our patients. But when we're able to get away and, really not have to focus on patient care, it's all good the same, right? So that's where we're at right now. Again, I just wanted to kind of do a quick, recap of, this ACOI conference while I was here. And, while a lot of stuff was still kind of fresh in my mind, I'm going to see you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. I want to say thanks again for all that you guys do and all of your support and all of your listens. So I want you to kind of keep on keeping on with going ahead and sharing today's episode. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed to the podcast. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at the same name, Lunch Learn Pod. And go to the website again, lunchlearnpod.com, for all of the episodes if you've missed one. And again, I'm at all of the favorite podcast apps: Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and of course Apple Podcasts, where I would love a 5-star review. And tell me what you think about today's episode. I would love to hear it. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye.